I know that you get really tired of us talking about AI all the time, and you don't really like AI. It kind of scares you. You think it's the Terminator's going to appear, and
Yes.
you don't like it. So I thought today we would talk about SharePoint, because I know that you like to talk about SharePoint. And but there is one thing with SharePoint. I'm not really an expert on it, as you know. So I thought that we might actually be joined by someone to help you, kind of a SharePoint friend. Is that okay if we do that?
I really like that idea. That's a great idea.
Okay, so our SharePoint friend here, obviously, we know Army. Hello, Army.
Hello. Nice to be
Welcome to
here.
Business Boost. And I'm sure everyone watching knows Army Diamond, but Army, do you just want to say hello and introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, hello. My name is Ami Diamond. I'm from Israel, not far from Tel Aviv, and I have a YouTube channel, SharePoint Wizard. I'm also a 3-year MVP in SharePoint and Teams, and I enjoy, and I have a dog, and I play the trumpet.
So we've got Mr. SharePoint, we've got SharePoint Wizard, but I want to really have a really good SharePoint show, right? So I thought we could just top this off. So just hold on to your hats, guys, because I've got the guy who is the OG SharePoint content creator. We've also got SharePoint Maven, Greg Zelfond here.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
It was certainly a pleasure
Welcome,
to
Greg.
have you. Can you just introduce yourself briefly for anyone who doesn't know who you are? But I'm sure most people watching the show know exactly who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Greg Zelfond. I'm an independent SharePoint consultant. I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, US. And what I do for a living, I help organizations, small, medium, large size organizations, migrate to SharePoint and Microsoft 365. And as you probably know from my blogs, the thing about me is that I only focus on out of the box, functionalities and goodness that we have in SharePoint. Never utilize any custom coding or custom development. And of course, hopefully you can visit my website, SharePointMaven.com.
Nice.
Well,
Good deal.
thanks for
Greg,
joining us both.
Yeah, very excited to have you here.
Same here.
I think we all not just us sitting on the show, but there's a ton of people who in their early days of SharePoint, I'm sure they knew about you and your blog, because you've been producing, like Nick said, you've been producing content for years now, and a ton of us in the community, grew our careers off of your blog. So, you're responsible for a lot of
Successes.
goodness. Yeah, a lot of successes. Thank you, Ami. Yeah, a lot of successes in the SharePoint world. So, again, honor to have you here. Glad you could be here and join us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Same
thank you,
here.
Greg.
And I enjoy your content as well.
Well, thank
Oh,
you.
appreciate
Yeah,
that.
we all grew up on you.
Okay. You're like my kids,
Oh,
Yeah.
man. Nick.
So with that, I guess we can start our kind of like SharePoint Showdown with all you guys here, and I'll just remain quiet because I've got the real SharePoint experts with me. But there's a few topics that I'd really like to dig into today with you guys, and I might be able to get AI in there somewhere, just so that we don't feel it's kind of been left out, But like SharePoint, really, when we think about it, is the foundation of Microsoft 365, right? It's there everywhere. It's infused everywhere. Everything runs on it. But in this kind of new age that we've got with, all this Copilot stuff and AI stuff, you see, it didn't take me long. Like, do you think that SharePoint is becoming more important or less important to the platform? And I guess I'll kick off with you, Therman.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, okay. I'm going to just default by saying I don't see SharePoint becoming less important anytime soon. The regardless of Copilot and how popular it's getting and how Microsoft is pushing that, I don't see it. There was a time when I I was questioning, where I was going to go in my career, and I was questioning the future of Microsoft years ago about whether or not SharePoint was really going to be something that I might hang my hat on, because a lot of tools were just getting better. Like out there in the world, there was so many tools that were just doing well, and SharePoint was still stuck in this like classic world. And I'm like, man, are we gonna catch up or what? Because I support a lot of government clients, and as I was supporting them, I was seeing like all the things that people outside of the public industry could do with SharePoint, and what I could not do for them, because one, they lag behind, and two, SharePoint Classic it got the job done, but modern SharePoint just took it to the next level. It entered, the competition with other apps. So I don't. That's the last time I even thought that. These days, even with Copilot growing, I don't see how it's in competition. If anything, they work together. So it's going to be more using SharePoint, especially since the feature of being allowed to use lists as your data source for your agents. This is something I've been waiting for, and I'm very excited, because I tell people all the time, remove your data from spreadsheets the way you use them and start using lists. And then now that you use lists, now we can start, leveraging that information that you put inside a list. So I don't see it shrinking at all.
Yeah,
I see it growing.
Greg, what do you think? You've been working with this right the way through that transition and up to this transition. So do you see anything different in what's going on now that might change the direction for SharePoint?
No, I don't think. If anything, I think we're going to see more and more usage. Essentially, SharePoint is a content management system for many other apps, right? Like Therman, mentioned, you use lists, you use SharePoint, you use OneDrive, you use SharePoint, you use Teams, you use SharePoint, and so on. I also, like Therman, had a concern many years ago when that was shortly before the modernization, I guess, of SharePoint, especially when Microsoft started pulling, tasks, and it became Planner, and List became its own thing, and so on. And I'm like, what's going to happen to SharePoint? But, luckily, right now we're in 2025, and, I think SharePoint usage is exploding. And, like Therman suggested, Copilot maybe is a much sexier word than SharePoint, but they're going to work together in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I think we need to break down SharePoint, because SharePoint contains lots of things. You can use SharePoint as a portal, okay? You could use SharePoint as a document library for document management. You can create pages, you can make lists, and each scenario can be separately, okay? So maybe a company will use the portal or the pages and for the portal of the company, but yet the lists or the document libraries they would use within the teams. And even if they're not aware of it, then actually they're still using it. And some people are afraid of using SharePoint because they heard of it, but if they use a list or a document library or a folder within Teams or something, or they sync it to their computer, they're not aware. But at the end, it's a SharePoint. So even if they don't know it, it's called SharePoint. Actually, they're using it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important, and actually. I'm amazed at the way the SharePoint pages increasing. So if you compare it to a classic page, now it doesn't look like SharePoint, okay? All of the flexible sections, all of the everything, so the AI and stuff. So they're trying to make it not look like SharePoint and more like something that you can be very flexible and not strictly. So there's lots of potential for that, especially with AI.
It reminds me of WordPress, but now, Nick, we are probably biased. You know what I'm saying? The three of us. So you're a Copilot guy. What about you? What do you think about the either the growing or the shrinking of SharePoint in the age of Copilot? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm interested to see what direction things going with SharePoint, because that discussion about how things look presentationally, we've talked about this before on the show. And Copilot doesn't care what stuff looks like, right? It just cares what data it can get to. So does the fact that we're layering this AI stuff on top of SharePoint mean that some of that primacy of I want it to look a certain way kind of goes away? I kind of remember when they started rolling out modern SharePoint. That was really before I was working with this stuff a great deal. But I know one of the directions seemed to be that we should treat SharePoint just like another app. Like you don't go into Word and be like, hey, I want Word to look different. You don't go into PowerPoint and be like, hey, I want PowerPoint to be designed in a completely different way. So why do people look at SharePoint and be like, hey, I want SharePoint to not look like SharePoint? And I think we went through a period of time where that was like the way that Microsoft saw it, and maybe they started to lose a bit of traction because of that. And so they've added in this stuff so that you can turn it into kind of a WordPress. But the issue with WordPress or with other site builders like that, like Squarespace or stuff like that, is presentationally they're fantastic, but in terms of how you actually build up your data model, they're terrible. And so with SharePoint, what we've got is these robust capabilities to build up a data model that isn't just about what the page looks like or the content of that page. We've got metadata and so on and so forth. Obviously, those things are going to be very important to AI, but does some of the UI stuff go away? And will we be talking in 5 or 10 years more about SharePoint embedded with AI stuff directly on top of it, rather than the SharePoint app interfaces that we talk about a lot today?
Yeah. I agree. I think that's where it is going. But hopefully, as long as there's still people running businesses, because I saw somebody talk about you could have CEOs be completely AI in the future, but whatever.
Yeah,
people are still running businesses. People are still working in the businesses. Then I definitely see I see SharePoint still growing alongside Copilot. And yeah, there's going to be a time where I think you're going to just ask, you're going to talk to a device and say, where's that report from last week? And then the report is going to find it. It's probably going to be on SharePoint. It's going to find it and surface it for you. And so the way that your SharePoint looks will probably be less important, but I think that's way down the line. But the way SharePoint is managing your data, I still think will be important. Ami, what you got?
I think SharePoint, the foundation of SharePoint and Copilot or AI is based on permissions. If you run permissions wrong, then data that is not supposed to be accessible will be accessible, and there can be oversharing and stuff. So it's important, just like you say, garbage in, garbage out. Permissions, if it's not managed, if a site is public and not private, or a Teams is public or not, then it will, in other words, fuck up the whole. The information. People will see things that they shouldn't see. Sorry for my dirty words, but I think it can be a disaster if the permissions are wrong. Okay, and people are not aware of it. So that's my perspective. You first, before you roll out AI, you need to check your.
But let me ask you
data.
something. So, when we started off with Copilot, there was this kind of, it's going to be exposing the CEO's performance review to everyone in the company, right? And I still hear about this all the time from the people who are professionally involved in setting up SharePoint, right? I hear about this issue. I am yet one time in 2 years to talk with a client where this has occurred. What happens every day, though, with clients that I talk to, is that their Copilot can't actually see what it needs to see in order to get the job done. It doesn't have access to the right information. It can't find the right information. And so this issue where we've talked about it, we've contextualized this problem from the perspective of we are worried about the actual permissions, because we want the permissions to give to not have oversharing. My concern is undersharing. That we don't have our data estate set up in such a way that Copilot actually has a representative view of what's needed to get the job done. But we seem as an industry of consultants to be just concerned about oversharing and not concerned about the other side of just enough access. What do you think of that?
I agree with you. It's a matter. I have customers that bought I don't know 100 licenses, but they're still in a file share, so they're not aware that OneDrive is not activated. They just think they buy a license and then they could maybe upload the files, but it's crazy. What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, I actually can agree with Nick because look, even long before Copilot, we had Delve, and it was exactly the same issue, right? People were concerned that it was oversharing, and many people were turning it off. I think it's all about training, to be honest, and education. And like you said, Nick, I mean, yes, Copilot will surface that confidential information potentially, but this is the information that they currently probably can get to just by doing some keyword search. And all Copilot is doing, it just happens to it just helps you find it faster. That's all that's happening. So I think it's all about proper training and education of the users.
Yeah, that's the key. The key is always training, because not you, but tons of people, a lot of people will get into a workplace, start to work, and that's just it. They just work. No one is saying you need to be, proficient in this thing before you start working there, even though we see that on resumes. It'll say something like, proficient in Excel or whatever. You could put that there, but have you ever actually taken real Excel training, you know what I'm saying, or PowerPoint training? Like, people get into these tools without proper training and just go crazy. And there's two sides. There's always two sides. Knowing how to use PowerPoint, for instance, is one thing. There's like a technical approach that you take to using PowerPoint, where the buttons are, what these things on the ribbons do, these tabs, the features behind the scene, the security, whatever. All of that stuff is like the technical stuff you could do with PowerPoint. Then there's other type of training where when you create your slides, do you know who you're presenting these slides to? Are your slides too busy? Do you have a million animations on there? What point are you trying to get across? That's another type of training. And you can see both of these types of training clash. One, someone who doesn't know how to technically do a thing on PowerPoint, and then two, someone who doesn't understand the nuances of briefing your peers versus briefing leadership, how to communicate properly, how to not overstuff your slides, and then use your words instead of using the slides. It's like a whole thing. So I 1000% agree with training. That's always a thing. Information management. SharePoint, obviously, one of the things it does is manage information. I've run across a few knowledge managers in my life. I personally am not a knowledge manager by trade. There's no official thing that says I'm a knowledge manager, but because I work with SharePoint and because I work with many organizations, I do in fact help them manage their knowledge. But it goes way deeper than that. Now, poor information management, has been a key problem for a lot of organizations, and workers have felt for a very long time. And about 20 years, Microsoft's answer to that has been SharePoint. They've given you SharePoint and said, hey, use this to do your knowledge management. Now, back to this training thing I was talking about. Microsoft handed over SharePoint, and there was some training involved with it too. But I think a lot of people, just like all these other tools, have access to SharePoint, but they might not necessarily know how to use it, with better practices, best practices, stuff like that. So my question to y'all, and Ami, I'll pitch to you first. Knowledge management in these days, right now, with SharePoint is still a problem. What do you think the problem is with, or a lot of what the challenges are that organizations still face today with knowledge management?
Yeah, well, there's always a discussion how to manage documents, if in folders or in metadata. And SharePoint, the more you learn SharePoint, you know the limitations. And if you don't know them, you can run into problems like either problems or even I was with a company that had, I don't know, so many versions of PowerPoint, and each PowerPoint was 100 mega or giga, and it blown the storage so much just because people were not aware. Maybe they could limit the maximum versions. Maybe there's intelligent way in a tenant to decide that Microsoft or AI decides how the versions are. But knowing the limitations like threshold of 5,000 that was never ever solved, and putting all your files in a migration to one library instead of multiple libraries. So there's so many things that if you know, I mean, there's a issue of giving people the freedom to open sites and teams on one side. You don't want to limit them because if you limit them, they won't use it. On the other hand, you need to set governance guidance or maybe prevent them from doing things in a way so they won't reach a problem. Even the URL, yes, of a SharePoint site, I don't know, I think it's 400 characters. If you exceed that, then you might have a problem. If you sync it to your computer, you'll have a problem if it's more than 300 files. So there's lots of things that they might find out, and planning proper architecture, governance, and maybe consulting with a consultant. Um, this is for the tenant management and also for the champions or key users.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to two things: information architecture, poor information architecture, and training. All right. So I know you already mentioned training, but in terms of information architecture, I think, SharePoint has a problem because of its history, right? I mean, we had SharePoint for more than 24 years now, since 2001. And of course, in the early days, it was classic with site collections, subsites, and subsites, many levels of subsites. And people get how to use, folders and subfolders, but without training, they don't understand the concept of site collections and pages and, subsites and so on. And then, of course, in 2016, I believe, we had the whole revamp of SharePoint. It totally changed. And now we have completely different look and feel. We have completely different structure. So that was obviously, obviously a step in the right direction, but I don't think it helped, right? Because now everyone, including consultants, had to learn everything from scratch. Another issue that I can potentially see, another problem is the fact, look, let's say you use Asana or Monday.com for project management or some of these tools, right? Whether you're uploading documents or managing tasks, it's just one product. With SharePoint, we have so many products. There are 3 different ways to manage tasks, right? Different products. The ongoing question, where do I store my documents? SharePoint, OneDrive Sync,
Teams.
OneDrive, Teams. So you have so many choices. So I think it just adds, unfortunately, to the confusion. But again, so obviously proper information architecture, it comes down to proper information architecture and training. I mean, right, the way you mitigate this is through training. I think the fact that, if I might add, the fact that, when Teams came along and, started creating, folders for channels, defeating the metadata, purpose of metadata,
Yes.
and then for different types of channels, you have, completely different SharePoint sites. This definitely does not help. All right. But,
No.
the good thing is, nobody canceled training yet. So, I think that's the way to mitigate it.
Yeah. Nick, what you got? What's your thoughts on information management in 2025 still being all jacked up?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that we're trying on a technical level to get humans to do things that humans naturally, most of us, are not very good at.
Yeah.
And we're having humans bridge the gap to make our technology work rather than having technology bridge the gap to help our humans work. And in some ways, tools like Copilot are helping that. In other ways, we've just gone back to the same problem of every time someone raises, hey, why can't Copilot do this? The answer is because your information wasn't right to begin with. And that's not a very good answer, to be honest. If every time you were driving along the highway, you were like, well, why couldn't my car get to 70 miles per hour? The answer was because you weren't pressing the gas pedal hard enough. Like, at what point do you say there's something wrong with the gas pedal as opposed to something wrong with your foot? So I think there's some big problems there. The other thing that I think is interesting is the way that this modern tool, Copilot, works with SharePoint doesn't really reward those organizations that have invested the most effort in SharePoint to date. The fact that, this lists thing is just coming online. The fact that Copilot doesn't see metadata. Like if you spent a lot of time like organizing your content using metadata or tagging and so on and so forth, then Copilot doesn't respect any of that. It doesn't care. And so what Microsoft has done is gone full speed into this new product while almost penalizing those organizations that have invested the most effort in their best practices to date. And that's not really a good way to get every organization on board with the idea of there are certain foundations that you need to lay before you step up to the next level. So I don't know. I feel like it's almost the wrong question. Is the question should be, how do we get the technology to think more like people do, rather than how do we train people to think in the way the technology does?
Yeah, see, that one is a tough one for me because, I mean, I think if you go with how do we get technology to think like people, the answer probably is AI. Your best bet is to try to train AI to do that, because just with generative chat, we see that you could talk to it in plain language. It'll talk back to you in plain language, like if you're talking to a person. But back to people. So I think what a lot of organizations suffer from, and it's probably the larger ones. Matter of fact, it's not probably. It is the larger ones. They hurt more when it comes to this. When it comes to information management, it's almost like they rely on the technology to kind of do the thing. And I don't see that. I don't subscribe to that. I'm like, before we even figure out what your technology should do to support you, how does your business run? What are your processes? What are you doing? Like, how does this whole thing work? Talk to me without using technology. And then those companies, those larger ones, they're hard. They're very difficult to undo a lot of practices that they've done for a lot of years. But if I get a small company and I start to tell them about the way I approach knowledge management, it's easy to deal with them and their 10 employees, or I'm sorry, easier to deal with them and their 10 employees to talk about how easy it is to find things after talking about their business. Like, how does your business run? Who are the key players? What are we doing here? And it just makes it easier to put the technology underneath that. My thing is like, this is kind of pie in the sky, but my thing is like, if you didn't have the technology, could you do this business? And a lot of the times they can. Let's say your company's or maybe you're a pet sitter. You do a lot of pet sitting. So now, before we introduce any technology, the way you do things is maybe old school technology. Somebody calls you, you write it down on a pad, and then you call somebody else and you say, listen, from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, you got to go over here to this address, walk their dog, and then go to this other address, walk their dog, and then call me and let me know when you're done. They're probably doing a great job as a team walking these dogs. So when I come in and I say, hey, let's lay out your processes so that when you start hiring people, they don't have to call you all the time to find out what to do next. They could just go find their information. You know your processes really well before even introducing some kind of technology. So when we lay these pieces of technology out, when we lay these processes out, they're beautiful processes. They start out great and they get better because you know your business really well and you've been running it without, some kind of support and technology. So to me, that's the key. That's really difficult with these big organizations, like I mentioned. Ami, what you got?
I just want to give a nice example where I saw how you take a list or a document library, and with AI, it can help you. So you have in the functionality, maybe it's the premium SharePoint, but you have the functionality part of the syntax project to autofill. So actually, you give the AI what you want to fetch from the document, and it adds it as a metadata. So people are lazy. People don't like to tag things. Okay,
Yeah.
and you can there's ways in SharePoint to say set a default or to do things document set that sets the. But if the AI is reliable and it can add the metadata based on the prompt you give, that's a game changer.
I've done some stuff with autofill, but the problem that I see with that, Army, is that when you move on to the kind of next phase of AI, Copilot doesn't care. Copilot isn't looking at that stuff, so
Copilot
It
sounds like a
might
jerk.
in the future.
well,
It might in the future.
It might in the future, but that's a really bad reason to make an investment in it today. And that's the problem with all of this. And I mean, Greg, have you seen this? I mean, you've been working with clients with these technologies over the years. You've been showing them these best practices. Do you talk to anyone who now is looking at Copilot and is frustrated that they've done everything right, but they still have issues because these things don't integrate well together?
So, look, most of my clients, I guess, are small to medium-sized businesses. And, at this point, they cannot afford, the additional cost of the license. So not many are using, Copilot yet. But I agree. It's, I think what I do get involved a lot, quite a bit, is making sure they have the proper governance, that they have the proper, security, permissions. That has definitely been quite a frequent request, lately. But yeah, I agree with all of you. I think it's just a matter. Obviously, Copilot and ChatGPT, they're not perfect yet. I think it's going to be a matter of time. Definitely lots of potential, especially in conjunction with SharePoint.
I actually have a question. Do you feel that the search in the M365 and the Copilot are like one can replace each other? Because the search it searches just for specific words or things, and the AI does specific words including understanding things. So maybe the search will be not relevant if the AI can take the metadata and things.
I mean, I would say that the intent is this idea that you have this semantic understanding of what every piece of content within your tenant does. But we're not there yet. And the fact that this experience hasn't been built onto the best practice foundations of SharePoint, I think, is a problem. I mean, I honestly
I
don't.
stopped using a search anymore. Once I have Copilot, I don't need the search because it gives me most of the information.
But I mean, but it's not finding that if you've deployed different content types or manage metadata, or you're organizing stuff in document sets and stuff like that. It's not finding that information because it truly understands how you've structured your data in relation to those SharePoint best practices or those SharePoint tools. It's just coincidentally finding that stuff based on other signals that it has in the actual content of the document. There's very little information from SharePoint that actually comes back to Copilot so that it can judge what it's going to pull out as something to look at. And so I think that's a weakness of it, because from my mind, those organizations that have taken the time to invest in, we're going to follow all of these best practices, we're going to get rid of folders, we're going to use metadata based organization, and so on and so forth, those things that are potentially the modern way of thinking about how do we organize stuff, they don't work.
Let's get to this last topic here about adoption, which I love this topic. So Greg, I'm gonna go to you with this one. So we talk a lot about best practices for products like SharePoint, but not all businesses are built the same. So not all practices best are not always a good fit. So when you consider different scales of businesses, and you did say you work with like small to mid-sized businesses, but let's include large in here. So any of large clients, like what are the most important differences to how they should aim to adopt and use SharePoint to get best results in your opinion?
To be honest, Therman, no difference at all, from my experience.
Really?
Yes. I mean, look, it's the same question that I get when, I work with different industries and, the client might say, do you have experience working with law firms and, finance and engineering firms? And yes, obviously there are some unique things related to those businesses and, obviously their business processes. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to SharePoint, the process is the same, right? The scale might be different, right? Communication might be different, but I always say you will need to adapt to how SharePoint, does things, right? It's all about limitations. Doesn't matter whether you're a small business or a large business. You can only put that many documents in a single library. You can only have that many characters in the URL. All right. There are certain rules when you create a new site or a new channel, for example. So I always tell my clients that, obviously there are some unique things and some recommendations, we might choose over the others. But at the end of the day, majority of organizations, I tell my clients, you will need to adapt to how SharePoint, does things, what information architecture allows and doesn't allow us to do. So again, the scale might be different, the communication, some of the governance might be different, but the way you adapt to SharePoint, in my opinion, is the same for any type of business.
Ami, what are your thoughts on different styles of adoption based on the size of the business?
Well, I think I agree with Greg in one aspect that, but I will raise the topic of champions. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
tra- just like migration, adoption, you don't do it all in one bang. Okay, you need to do quick wins. You need to explain to people that maybe are quicker adopters. If you can do train the trainer. Okay, if the organization is big enough and has a training organization, sometimes they can explain better because they know the buzzwords of the company where I wouldn't know that. So it could be a way that I train directly the end user or the champions or the trainer. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe to take one pilot and actually to show how it works and how it serves the business um, needs. And another thing is also to get management support. So there's you could go from the bottoms up, so the champions can recommend to other people. But
Yeah.
if the management is not telling the users you're starting to work, and if you have management support, it helps. Okay,
Yeah.
because they also recommend and also they demand. So they say from this point on, you stop using server, you start using it, and that's the guideline, and it makes it easier. So um, what's there's the easy way and there's the harder way, but it's actually like a change. Or okay, people don't like changes,
Yeah.
so you need also to treat, if it new for the organization, you need to show them the benefits. And if they start comparing, it's just like the AI, so they always compare Copilot to ChatGPT or to Grok or things. So you
Yeah.
need to show and explain how the security is important, how So that's my point of. And there's no not a right way. It depends on how the organization works, how they did it. If they had a successful other application, then you can learn and go according to that. So it needs
Yeah.
to be together.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's why the word style is in the question, and I like that because it's basically like how you approach it. And Greg mentioned communication, and then you mentioned what I was going to talk about with communication, which is when I was inside of an organization. So like when I'm an employee, I worked inside of a department where there was a few levels between the person that ran that shop and the person at the top of the food chain. So if I came to the person who was running that shop with this great idea for something that we could really do, I seen some holes where we could plug up. This is great. That person, 9 times out of 10, because they saw the vision, she would buy in and be like, hell yeah, that's a really good idea. Now, taking it up the food chain was the problem because she'd have to get through, I think, 1 or 2 layers to get to the top. And it always gets shot down because they didn't buy in. They didn't see the vision. Fine, whatever. But now, the cool thing about being independent is you get to circumvent that whole entire process. You know what I'm saying? Like you get to skip the people who may or may not block the process, and that person at the top of the food chain or very close to the top of the food chain is who we get to speak to now. And we have direct communication with the person who can really, to your point,
level.
they can recommend or demand, you know what I'm saying? And they make things happen. So I love that, you know what I'm saying? And to me, the difference in style with adoption, I think Greg is right. It pretty much is the same thing. I think what changes is, again, the communication. So how you speak to the person that you're dealing with is how you figure out, maybe they want to do a big rollout or they don't, or they they already are in heavy communication with their folks. So the way that they're going to, speak to their folks is different, or maybe they want to have a few more touch points with you. So it's not just, hey, deliver in 30 days support or something like that. They want to do a lot of support, through the 30 days, or have you come and train. It's a whole thing. I agree. But the difference is the communication. Now, Nick, you've done adoption, but I don't think you've done any SharePoint adoption for an organization. Do you have any thoughts on this? Or have you done some SharePoint adoption?
Well, I think, because of the whole Copilot needs the data thing, like often the starting point with is Copilot going to work well for you comes down to where does your data live? Is it in SharePoint? How is it organized? And so on and so forth. So from that point of view, yeah, I do touch this stuff. But I think that communication piece is so important. But I also think setting the right expectation is really important. And I think the big difference between different scales of organization is that the size of that kind of short to medium term aspiration can be different depending on how your business is set up, right? Like you might, in a larger organization, have more services that you want to adopt overall, but the inertia against that adoption might be greater. Whereas if you're in a smaller, leaner organization, you might not need as much of that Microsoft 365 tool set, but actually the stuff that is useful to you, you're able to push forward quicker because it's 10 people sitting in an office together who can all talk to each other about it, as opposed to 10,000 people who are split across the country. And so I think that kind of dynamic of like how rapidly can you move and how broad do you want to go, I think that's a big difference that I see.
Yeah.
I think
real quick. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, the
good.
funny thing is sometimes adoption for a small company is more complicated than a big company. Because a big company,
I love the small ones. I love the small companies. Or mid-size.
I can tell you, because with a big company, you plan in advance, and it's much. If you plan in advance, it can be like just like. But in a small company, each one can ask. Can make it can be more confusing, more complicated sometimes for small customers than a big company. I can tell you, because sometimes they think they bought a license, they're already you're responsible already for the whole 365, and if the hardware is not okay, and if they all kinds of things, all of sometimes so it can vary, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's a I get it, but there's a there's a world that I want to continue to live in where that is not my experience. I totally expect it with the big organizations, but not these small and mid-sized. I will say though, Disney World or Walt Disney Corporation, whatever, obviously we all know them and they're a large organization. I've been to the park, the Disney World Park in Florida, way more times than I care to admit as an adult. And I see they do something with their culture that works from the top all the way down. Everybody in the park gives you a certain type of interaction when you interact with them. Now, a few weeks ago, I was at Disneyland Paris. So now I'm doing international Disney. So I'm at Disneyland Paris, and we went out there because, you know, my wife is a big Disney fan. We went to see the fireworks, and you could see the difference now between the operations and how they ran in the Florida park versus the one in Paris, because Paris was it was in a negative way. I'm saying this is a negative thing. Unbelievable. The way that they ran the operations to get everybody in there to see the fireworks. If one person could have caused a stampede, it would have been a problem. But the point is, there really is an effect that you can have from the top all the way down to the bottom where your workers work. That's just something that just is culture. And that is really, really difficult to do. That's why you see less larger organizations being able to do that. I did want to wrap up here before we went, unless one of y'all had any points about Disney or large organizations. But
I wondered where you were going to go. I thought you were going to start like singing a song.
None of that.
I wondered where you were wrapping up to then. But
yeah. I just wanted to point that out because I don't like. I don't want to sound grumpy, but I'm not a fan of theme parks in general, including Disney. But I am impressed by the way that they permeate that culture from the top all the way down to everybody working in the park. It's crazy to me. So
I bet they still haven't got SharePoint worked out.
Just I bet you they don't. I bet you're right. Before we go, Greg, where can people find you on the internet? What's like the best link for them to reach out to you and get a hold of you?
Absolutely. I guess the best link would be my blog, SharePointMaven.com. I also have YouTube channel and a podcast. But yeah, all the blogs I religiously, blog. That's kind of my baby. So feel free to check it out, SharePointMaven.com.
Nice. Ami, what about you?
Well, I have my YouTube channel, SharePoint Wizard, and I post a lot on LinkedIn. So hopefully you can not miss my post. I try to give some tips and tricks and some new features, but also best practices. And I also enjoy sharing content of other people. So I enjoy all of the people here that share content. And I think even if all of us share the same topic, each one will give his own perspective and point of view. And it's interesting and it's not repetitive because each one has a different experience and we can learn from each other. So I have the honor to meet all of you and speak to you. I'm really happy. So
same here. Appreciate that, Ami. I totally agree. Nick, what you got? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn every day. If you want to read something from the AI consultant who is grumpiest about AI, then I'm there every day writing about what's wrong with it. So there you go. What about you, Therman?
LinkedIn, same here. I did take a break because again, I was on vacation this whole summer. Matter of fact, the beginning of summer, like I told you, I removed all the apps from my phone. So now I'm only accessing LinkedIn from the desktop, and it's been great. I still love me some LinkedIn, and I'm there daily, and I'm posting like a psycho. But having it off my phone is great. So just reach out on LinkedIn. I do the same thing like what Ami is talking about. I love sharing other people's content. I love posting about SharePoint. If you want to know more about SharePoint and how you could adapt to your organization, follow me or any one of us here. We love it, and and Greg obviously has been posting about it for years. So thanks again. It was great having y'all here. This was a good discussion. Excited for everybody to have this. All right, good seeing y'all.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
bye.